done in our family. So first I'm going to pray real quick. God, I just ask you to give me the words to speak, that them be yours, not mine, and to open everyone's ears, hearts, to hear what I have to say and to receive your word, Lord. Amen. All right, so I was born and raised in church from 1 week old. My mom had me there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. She had me there all the time. When I was 5 years old, she says I got saved. I don't remember it, but she said I got saved, baptized. So then again, when I was about 12 years old at summer camp, I then received Jesus, and I knew it at that point. In 2002, my life changed dramatically, and it was a crazy couple years from there. I was 16 years old. My parents were getting a divorce. I was battling depression really bad. I had been in Cincinnati Children's psych ward. They had diagnosed me with being bipolar. I was cutting a lot. I was suicidal. And I also was playing sports. My entire life, sports were a huge, huge deal for me. And my junior year, I actually was offered scholarships for several schools. My dad even flew me out to California to visit some of the schools that had offered me, and down in Florida, because I was planning on getting as far away as possible. So I had offered some scholarships my junior year, and then I was playing volleyball that year, and my arm kept getting stuck in the air. And we didn't know what was going on. It kept dislocating, it would get stuck in the air. And then I was playing softball that year, and when the ball would come in, I would start seeing like multiple, and I couldn't figure out which one was the actual one. And nobody could figure out what was going on. Doctors would put me in arm slings and neck braces. I was seeing eye doctors. And finally, a neurosurgeon diagnosed me with something called Chiari malformation, where my brain was sitting down in my spine more. So I lost all my scholarships. I couldn't play sports my senior year, and I was super mad at God I felt like he took it from me. So I was mad at him, and so I decided that I was done with him, and I had made promises to him to stay pure before marriage, and I was done with that. Like anything I could break to God that year, I was gonna do it. So after that going on, I was partying a bunch. I actually got raped at a party. And this was my senior year of high school. And during that happening, there was a porn playing. I had never seen a porn before. And something about that, as traumatic as that experience was, something in my brain triggered, and that was an addiction that I ended up dealing with for 10 plus years. And then 2003, I graduated high school, and 2003 and 2004 were a complete blur pretty much. I was an alcoholic at that point. I was messing around. I got engaged just to get out of the current situation. I didn't even barely know the guy, and found out that he was cheating. So I just decided to pack my car up, and I drove to Florida. I didn't have money. I had my car. I took what I had of clothes, and I left. So to survive down there, I did what I had to until had a lot of really near-death experiences down there, and God brought me to my knees in a nasty hotel parking lot. Thank Jesus. But I drove back, and when I drove back, my aunt called me and invited me to her church. I had some church hurt from previous, and I didn't want to go back to where I was at, so she invited me to her church, and I was like, well, I have to be in church. God just brought me through this, like, that's where I'm going. So I didn't want to go alone. So I brought my dad's girlfriend's son, who was 6 or 7 at the time, just so I had somebody to go with me. And he wanted to go to children's church. He had never been to church before. He wanted to go to children's church, and Jeff was running the children's church that day, so my aunt introduced me to him to drop off my little brother, and me and Jeff shook hands for I felt like 20 years to me. And after he walked away, I told my aunt that I was going to marry him one day. And then that night he was playing basketball, actually, so I went to watch him play basketball. And this man stole my shoes. He dripped his sweat all over me. and he passed gas on me all that night, the very first day he met me, and here we are today. But we started dating actually in October of 2004, got engaged by December, and we were married in May. And he knew everything up front about me. I was very open with everything. And our life looked really good from the outside. Like, we had a nice house, we both had nice jobs, we were in a good church at the time, but I was struggling really bad with migraines and depression and didn't know how to deal with a lot of my stuff, and we would fight. Well, I would fight, and I would leave, because that's my go-to thing, is something's bad happening, I run. So he found that out after a while, and he would start hiding my keys so I couldn't go anywhere before the fight would start. So I would lock myself in a room, and I had started cutting really bad again, and I had a ton of medicine from all my health stuff, so I would just overdose on that. Until January of 2006, when I became pregnant with Lucas. And during that pregnancy, I was hospitalized 13 times. I was struggling to keep a job because of it. And then right before I had him, I actually passed out at work. I thought my water had broke. My doctor told me I was young and stupid, and ended up my water had broke. I had no fluid left whatsoever. I almost died. He almost died. I had an emergency C-section at 34 weeks, and he wasn't developed. He had to go into the NICU for 21 days, but I stayed at the hospital with him the whole time. And we finally got to go home. We were home for a couple months, and then December of 2006, I was rocking him in the rocking chair in our living room. Jeff was at work, and I went to stand up, and nothing from my neck down worked. I dropped him. I went down. My phone was close by with me, so it was like I was having really bad twitches in my legs and arms. My reflexes weren't working. I finally was able to grab my phone from the ground and called his work. They sent him home, and he took me to the hospital. And I was at Christ Hospital for 2 weeks before they ended up having to do emergency brain, neck, and back surgery on me. They took out the back part of my skull, where the hole where your brainstem and spinal cord are supposed to meet. My brain was stuck in there, so they had to widen that, put it back up, build a shelf in to hold my brain up, and then unroof my top 2 vertebrae. And I was in the hospital for a really long time. Lucas was only a couple months old, and he was sick, and I had to relearn how to walk. I couldn't hold him, so it was a really trying time. And then in 2007, I got pregnant with Zane. And his pregnancy was completely different since I already had the surgery, but I was sick, like very sick, not just morning sick, like I was sick all day, every day. And we ended up having some tests, and they were really pushing for us to have an abortion with him. They said that they did a bunch of tests on the baby and on me, and they said he was not developing, he was not going to be able to function, he would not be able to breathe on his own. They just kept going on and on. Like, this is not a quality of life you want for your kid. You need to have an abortion. Pushed for it. But we kept seeking God through it, and that wasn't an option for us. So I ended up going into labor at 36 weeks with him, and he came out fully developed and completely fine. And he came out 7 pounds, 3 ounces at 34 weeks. So things were great with him. He got to go home immediately. I had to get put under to have him, and needed a blood transfusion. That's a whole other story, but he was great. So we were blessed with another miracle already, and he ended up having a small surgery when he was 3 months old on his stomach, but God worked in that, and he's been great with that since. So after that happened, we felt a calling to foster care, and we actually moved our family. Zane was a baby. Lucas was 1, I believe, still at the time, and we moved our family to Texas to be relief house parents at a children's home. So every 4 days we would move houses and parent 12 kids, and we loved it. It was an amazing experience. But Lucas, at this point, every single day of Lucas's life, from the day he was born till he was 2 years old, he threw up. And I'm not saying like little baby spit up, I'm like projectile vomiting. The kid was, and we had seen specialist after specialist. Nobody knew what was going on, so we just kept going with life. That's just what the kid did. And then he started having seizures one night in one of the houses. We took him to the hospital, and they told us that he needed to have brain surgery, the same that he had what I had, and he needed to have brain surgery. and they gave us an option of like 5 hospitals in the country, and Cincinnati Children's was one of them. So we moved our family back, and he had surgery when he was 2, and his, thank God, was so much easier than mine. The next day they had to sedate him because he was trying to get up and run. So they had to sedate him just so he would heal, because he was ready to go. Like, he felt better and he was ready to go. So after he was healed and everything, we still felt called to foster care, and we moved to Indiana, and we were house parents, I guess, foster parents for 7 Liberian teenagers that came over from Africa. Either their parents, the refugees, their parents either had been killed in the war, or they just wanted a better life for them. They couldn't care for them. And we did that for several months. The house ended up being shut down, and we weren't sure what we were supposed to do at that point. So Jeff ended up getting a job back in Texas in the oil field, so we moved back to Texas. We were there for another 7 years, I believe, at that point. And I was homeschooling the boys full time. Jeff was working in the oil field. He was gone all the time. We were still involved in our church, doing different ministries, and we ended up towards the end of our time in Texas being involved with a ministry called Tent City. It was a homeless ministry. There was 60 military tents set up in an open field. We moved a camper onto the grounds, and I stayed there full time, cooking breakfast, lunch, dinner. We were running a food pantry and clothing shelter for them. We had different churches come in. We were taking them to church on Sunday in a van, and we were seeing, it was a really dark place when we started, and we were really seeing God's light break through. People were coming to know him, and while we were there, Lucas actually woke up one morning, and he could not walk, like, at all. He couldn't put any weight down, and that was out of the blue. Like, he just woke up like that. So we took him to the hospital, and they did x-rays, and they did some different scans, and his x-rays looked like someone had taken a hole punch and punched holes in his hips and down his thighs. And the doctors said that he wouldn't walk ever again. They didn't know what it was, some rare kind of cancer that was eating at his bones. He would never walk again. And Jeff was out of the state. I don't even know where he was at that point. He was gone, and so a family from our homeschool group asked if they could come over and pray with him, and I was like, sure. So they came, and they didn't just pray for him, they were anointing him, they were laying hands on him, and I hadn't seen, like, we were praying for our kids, but it wasn't this, and I was like, what are these people doing? Like, but I'm like, it's in the Bible, like, we know it's there, but it's not something we did. Well, the next morning, when I woke up, a baby's running around the room. And the doctors, of course, said, oh, it must have been something with the machine. We don't know what's wrong, but, he's fine. We went home. Like, they rescanned everything. It was clear. He was good. And then at this point, my health of everything was all over the place. I had, at that point, had a partial hysterectomy, a full hysterectomy. I kept getting ovarian masses after I had my ovaries taken out, to the point, like, they were the size of watermelon, attaching to my other organs. I had, I think we're at 7 surgeries at this point. And I was also, the dislocating stuff started coming back. And I hadn't had that since in high school, and I was like, didn't know what was going on. And then I also started passing out all the time. Like, the boys would find me passed out in the house and have to call my dad or 911 because Jeff would be gone. And it ended up being like a regular thing for us. Like, Jeff laughs about it now because I'd be cooking dinner and I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna pass out, and I'd end up on the ground, and he'd just take over dinner. Like, we just kept going. Like, that's how regular it was. It was all the time. And we had to keep going to Dallas, which was a 6-hour drive each way, and they would keep us sometimes, and we'd be stuck either with our kids or without our kids, far away, and it became a lot, and the doctors there had no idea what was going on. But they wanted me to have a full-time live-in nurse, and I was like not even 30 at that point. I'm just like, wasn't having it. So Jeff made the decision to move us back to Ohio so that my mom could help out with my health. So we moved back, and Again, I got super angry with God about my health. I was angry at Jeff for moving us back where I didn't want to go. So I started drinking a lot at that point again, and I was mixing it with all the medicines I was taking. I was on over 30 pills a day at that point already, mixing it with alcohol, and then I had prescriptions for all kinds of oxy and everything else, and I was constantly taking them, and I hate this part of the story, but it has a big part. So at that point, I don't remember most of that year, but I know I had an affair on Jeff, and he came in one day, thought I was just hanging out with a friend, and I told him what was going on, and I thought, you can see him. I thought he was going to kill him, and immediately he forgives the guy, asked to give him a ride if he needed one, and just wanted me to get help. So if you ever need to see Jesus' love for somebody, hang around this man. At that point, I was like, God, whatever you want, I'm like, for real this time. I'm turning my life towards you. And right after that, Lucas, with Kiara, you're supposed to every year, at least once a year, get a MRI of your brain to make sure, because it can switch really fast. And he was having bad migraines again, so they did the MRI, and we took him to Children's to get the results, and the nurse practitioner came in, and she was like, I have to go get a doctor, I'll be right back. I'm like, great. Doctor comes in, he was like, I'm gonna go get the head of neurosurgery, I'll be right back. So me and Lucas are flipping out at this point, and then the neurosurgeon comes in and said, I have no idea how to tell you this. And we're like, just tell us, we've been waiting forever. And he was like, it doesn't even look like Lucas has ever had brain surgery, let alone he does not have Kiara anymore. And it's not something that ever goes away. Like, there's no cure to it. The surgery is to make your quality of life better, and no trace of it whatsoever. So we were given yet another miracle with him. At that point, we got really involved in church. We were doing an internship. We were involved in ministry in a lot of different ways, and our heart was really in missions, and we started going on some mission trips to Mexico. And we had some church hurt going on during this time, but in 2019, October 2019, we actually helped open up a ministry called Hunger House in Juarez, Mexico. It started off with just a small orphanage and a small, I think it was somebody's house at the time, which if you saw their houses, it's a pallet thrown together with nothing. And we started with a few kids, and now today there's over 6 hunger houses open and the orphanage, and they are seeing kids saved. They are feeding them. They just had their first baptismal. I'm sorry.
Started with how much?
Oh, a handful of kids.
Remnant. Just a remnant. That's what you
Just a little bit.
Amen. Amen. Come on.
And so part of our heart is always going to be down there in Mexico, but God has been calling us to things here. Even we feel like missionaries, we're being called to be missionaries in the United States. We're not sure what it all looks like yet, but during that time also, Jeff had he was driving a semi-truck, and that was about 2018, and he went off the road. It was right after a bridge, thank God, and went down a ravine and ended up his truck was up a tree, and he had passed out from it, and he shouldn't have lived. If we saw the truck after we saw everything was destroyed, and he was able to climb out of the tree, climb down, and walked away with a couple broken ribs and some glass in his arm. So yet again, we had another big miracle. And then, now we're going to fast forward to last year. Last year was a weird year for us. We got COVID the Christmas before, and after that, it was like my body didn't know how to bounce back from it. And at this point, they had diagnosed Lucas and Zane both with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is what I had, which was the dislocating thing. And then Zane also was diagnosed with POTS, which was my passing out thing, which we didn't know till years later. So we were all struggling. Zane would get real lightheaded and have to sit down. Me and Lucas Zane's knee was dislocating like constantly. It was, people would look at him because it was like on a different part of his leg. His whole kneecap would move. I was dislocating something every single week at least, And I had actually been, last year was fitted for like finger splints that were going to go on every single joint of my fingers. They were going to fuse my thumbs straight together, and then I was going to have chains that would hold up to my elbow on both arms. They said I wasn't able to write, I wasn't able to paint, I couldn't cook, I couldn't do anything that had to do with my hands, on top of everything else dislocating. And then my shoulder started dislocating bad, and I had to have surgery on my shoulder last year early, and it didn't take at all. So I had to have the surgery a second time last year, and then I ended up having leg surgery from a freak accident that happened. So we were up to surgery 9, 10, and 11 last year, and at that time we also moved from Eastgate to Sardinia, and the boys were wanting to be in youth group. They had been visiting, we had visited a church before COVID hit, and they went to youth group a little bit there, and then so they were wanting to find a youth group, and I couldn't drive last year almost at all. Jeff was working a ton, so we're like, we're just gonna find somewhere close. That way my mom can help, or he can drop him off to work. So we were looking for somewhere close that still believed the same thing as us, and we found, it was Resonance Church at the time, and so we would take them, well, somebody would take them Sunday nights, and they were going, and they were begging us to go to church there. Like, you guys would like it there, like, these people are awesome, you're gonna love it. And we were just not in that place at the moment. And finally, Christmas service, they were like, let's at least go for Christmas. So we went, and they were talking about physical healing and different things, and I was kind of watching for a little while, and it's like, these people are doing what the people in Texas did for Lucas when he got healed. And I was like intrigued, and I decided, you know what, I have so much going on. And they were talking about doing surgery on my jaw, like all these other things again. And I was like, I'm gonna go up and get physical healing, I need this. So I went up, and people started praying over me. That man in the second row stopped everyone, because he was listening to what God was telling him, and he started calling out things in my past that I've never told anyone. And that's where God started my healing. Amen. He started from the inside, because I had a lot to uncover and unbury that I had pushed down for a while. And so we stopped the physical healing, and we started going for that. And I mean, I cried. I don't cry, I'm crying now, but I don't cry. And I ugly cried, like the loudest thing. Like, I was like, Brown County heard me. He'll tell you, it came from deep. And so that was in December, and we started going to church there regularly after that. And then in March, we were supposed to be going back down to Mexico for another mission trip, and I started getting really bad migraines again, and my vision started to go. And I'm like, and we drive when we go to Mexico. We've driven all but one time, and that's over a 24-hour drive. And I'm like, I need to be able to see. I can't do it with these migraines. Like, what are we gonna do? So I decided right before a trip to go up, and I was like, now I'm ready for physical healing. So I thought. So I went up and prayed with some people, and the pastor was like, I think we need to dig deep in this. And he led me through, him and another pastor led me through a deliverance prayer, and we went through all the stuff I'm telling you and more. And they were writing down things, and I was renouncing things, and afterwards I felt light and free for the first time in a really long time. But being me, I was still skeptical a little bit of it. But we ended up going on the mission trip, and we were down there for over 2 weeks. I didn't have one migraine. I didn't even have a headache. I could see clear. I was running around and picking up the kids, which I couldn't have done before. Nothing hurt the entire time. And I also, from that day when we did the prayer, my kids also got healed that same day of their stuff, and I stopped all of our medication. Amen. I had been on medicine for my bipolar for over 20 years, and the doctors were like, you can't be off this ever. You're going to be on these things for your life. I mean, I have a box still at home of medicines, and I haven't taken any of that.
Right. Praise God.
And then so we got back, and I was super excited to tell everybody, I'm healed. Everything's great. I was so excited to tell them all. And then May comes around, and all of a sudden, some other health issues started coming up. Things I hadn't had ever, like my thyroid. The doctor was saying my thyroid was all messed up. I need to be on this medication for the rest of my life because it's not going to work. And my blood pressure started doing weird things. Like there was like 3 big things, and they were telling me all these things that were going to happen to me, and I didn't want to go forward and tell them, like, because they had just prayed healing, and I had been healed, and like I was kind of embarrassed about it. So I was like, I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm just gonna deal with it myself. And one morning, it was in May, I was doing church greeting that day, and people were coming in, and my friend came by, and she was going to be doing a prophetic painting that day. And she came by, and she's like, I have no idea what I'm going to paint. Like, God hasn't showed me anything. I have no idea. I'm like, you better hurry. Church is about to start. Like, I was like, I'll pray for you, but I don't know what to tell you. So I started praying for her, and she walked by again, like right before service started, and I put my hand on her shoulder, and God gave me this vision all of a sudden of these 2 hands in these blue, purple, and white paints just like messing up on the canvas with their hands, no paintbrush, and it was literally just a mess. And I'm like, I'm not going to go tell her that she's supposed to finger paint in front of church. Like, she's a really good artist. Like, you need to go do that. So I was like, not happening, Jesus. Like, so I'm still greeting, and church started, and we still had people coming in, so I was still in the back. And about the 3rd song, and I went in to service, and I was trying to see what she was painting. I was curious what she was doing. And she's up there, full abandon, both hands on the canvas with blue and purple and white paint. And I dropped to my knees. And I went forward after to tell her that, like, I think I was supposed to tell you this, but I don't know why, and I thought you would think I was crazy. And she was like, go stick your hands in the paint. And I was like, I'm not going to go mess up your painting. She was like, are you kidding? Like, it's a mess. Go stick your hands in that paint. And I was like, we argued back and forth for a while. I finally, with a few other members of the prayer team, went up there, and as soon as I stuck my hands on that, I literally felt all the physical ailments leave my body. And I had gone back to the doctor, and they couldn't find any of those things anymore. I test or blood work. And like I said, the boys had been healed. So at that point, I told God I was all in, no matter what it was. This year it's been miracle after miracle our whole lives, but this year God has really, really called us to something deeper. I think that's what he's doing actually in this country right now. I wanted to share a couple of verses with you. Last month during worship, I was praying, and I thought God was giving me a word for somebody else in the church, and he was giving me this vision of a person standing there, and this water rushed over them from the top down, and when it was happening, the person was grabbing onto things and holding them and even picking things up off the ground, and God was like, that's not for somebody else, that was for you, that's you, that's what you've done, but we're done with that. Like, we're done, you're all in. So in Galatians 5:1, God says, stand fast therefore in the liberty by which Christ has made us free. Do not be entangled again with the yoke of bondage. And in Hebrews 12:1 and 2, he says, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great cloud of witness, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of God, of the throne of God. So I ask you, first of all, if you don't know Jesus, he will change your life. He's done more for me than I can ever imagine. And like Scott was talking before, I can't go back. Like, it's not even a possibility now. And if you do know Jesus, first of all, he can heal you from anything, but what is it, something that you're holding on to still? Like, he wants to make you free. I'm now walking in the freedom and authority that Christ died for me, and he wants that for each and every one of us. So, Pastor Scott, if you want to come up now.